They call it the moment everything changes. For William Shaw, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in Vista Point, Idaho, when he saw a young woman being forced into a van by three men. He had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. William looked like just another broke construction worker, trying to keep the lights on for his 12-year-old daughter. But buried beneath years of suppressed memories and unpaid bills was something Ruslen Petrov's trafficking organization couldn't have anticipated. A former Navy SEAL whose protective instincts would explode back to life the second they threatened his child. What started as one father's desperate attempt to help Crystal Wade escape her captives became a week-long war in a quiet mountain town. Military training meant criminal ruthlessness. A man running from his past discovered it was exactly what he needed to fight for his future, and the phrase "wrong person to mess with" took on a whole new meaning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock beside William Shaw's bed showed 5:47 a.m. when it started its shrill announcement that another day of struggle was about to begin. He rolled over on the thin mattress, his back protesting from years of construction work and nights spent on furniture that had seen better decades. The apartment around him told the story of a man barely keeping his head above water, peeling wallpaper he couldn't afford to replace, a kitchen table with one wobbly leg propped up by phone books, and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly because the motor was dying. William sat up slowly, running his hands through dark hair that was starting to show gray at 38. His reflection in the cracked mirror across the room showed a man who looked older than his years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights worrying about bills and too many days pushing his body beyond its limits just to make ends meet. The scars on his chest and arms were mostly hidden under his work shirts, reminders of a past life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Dad?" The voice came from the doorway, soft and concerned. Sage Shaw stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had been her companion since she was 5. At 12, she was starting to look more like her mother every day, which brought William both joy and a sharp pang of loss that never quite went away. "Hey there, kiddo," William said, managing a smile that was more genuine than most people got from him these days. "You're up early. I heard the alarm and wanted to make sure you were okay," Sage said, stepping into the room. She had this way of looking at him that made William feel like she could see right through whatever brave face he was trying to put on. It was both comforting and terrifying to be loved, that, completely, by someone. William stood up and walked over to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just another day at the construction site. You know the drill." But Sage's expression didn't change. She had inherited her mother's ability to read people, and at 12, she was already too good at seeing through her father's attempts to shield her from their financial reality. "Dad, I heard you on the phone last night with the electric company. Are we going to lose the lights again?" The question hit William like a punch to the gut. He had tried so hard to keep these conversations away from Sage's ears, but their apartment was small and the walls were thin. Last month, they had spent 3 days without electricity until William managed to scrape together enough money for a partial payment. He had told Sage it was an adventure, like camping indoors, but she was getting too old for those kinds of explanations. "We're going to be fine," William said, and he meant it, even if he wasn't entirely sure how he was going to make it true. "I've got some overtime lined up this week, and Mrs. Henderson next door said she might have some odd jobs for me to do around her place. We'll make it work." Sage nodded, but William could see the worry in her eyes. She was 12 years old and already carrying burdens that no child should have to think about. It made something fierce and protective rise up in his chest. The same feeling that had once made him one of the most effective soldiers the Navy SEALs had ever trained. "Go get ready for school," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I'll make us some breakfast." The kitchen was barely big enough for two people, but William moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make the most of limited resources. He scrambled the last 3 eggs in the refrigerator, toasted bread that was a day past its prime, and poured orange juice that had been watered down to make it last longer. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. Sage appeared 15 minutes later, dressed in jeans that were getting too short and a sweater she had worn 3 times that week already. William made a mental note to check the thrift stores that weekend, though he knew his budget wouldn't stretch far enough for much. "Dad," Sage said as she sat down at the wobbly table, "Jenny's mom is looking for someone to fix their back deck. I told her you were really good at that stuff." William smiled at his daughter's unwavering faith in his abilities. "Thanks for the recommendation, kiddo. I'll give Mrs. Patterson a call after work." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from two people who have learned to be a complete family, even when pieces are missing. William watched Sage carefully eat every bite on her plate, and he pushed half of his eggs onto her plate when she wasn't looking. "I can walk to school today," Sage said as they finished eating. "You don't have to drive me." William was already shaking his head before she finished the sentence. "Nice try, but I'm driving you. It's on my way to the job site anyway." This was only partially true. The construction site where William worked was actually 15 minutes in the opposite direction from Sage's school, but he would never admit that to her. These morning drives were often the best part of his day. 10 minutes when they could talk about her classes, her friends, or whatever random thoughts were bouncing around in her 12-year-old mind. The truck that William drove was almost as old as Sage herself, a Ford pickup that had seen better decades, but still ran reliably enough to get them where they needed to go. The passenger seat had a tear in the vinyl that William had covered with duct tape, and the radio only picked up 2 stations clearly, but it was theirs, and it was paid for. As they drove through the streets of Vista Point, William looked out at the town that had become their home 3 years ago. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the mountains provided a stunning backdrop for a community that moved at its own pace. The cost of living was lower than in the big cities, which was why William had moved here after leaving the military, but jobs were scarce, and the pay was never quite enough. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sage said as they stopped at a red light. "You can ask me anything, sweetheart, you know that." Sage was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at a group of high school students waiting at a bus stop. "Do you ever miss being in the Navy?" The question caught William off guard. Sage rarely asked about his military service, and he had never shared many details about what his life had been like before she was born. The official story was that he had served his time, done his duty, and decided to start a family. The truth was considerably more complicated. "Sometimes," William said carefully, "I miss some of the people I served with. Good men who became like brothers to me. But I don't miss being away from you and your mom for months at a time. This was true as far as it went. What William didn't say was that he also didn't miss the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way his hands would shake sometimes when he heard certain sounds. He didn't miss the weight of decisions that had life and death consequences, or the way violence had become as natural to him as breathing. "Were you ever scared?" Sage asked. William considered the question as the light turned green and they continued toward her school. "Yeah, kiddo. I was scared sometimes. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It just means you understand that what you're doing matters." They pulled up in front of Vista Point Middle School, a modest brick building that served students from all over the rural county. William watched as kids streamed toward the entrance. Backpacks slung over shoulders, voices carrying the excitement and drama that seemed to define middle school existence. "Have a good day at school," William said, leaning over to give Sage a hug. "I'll pick you up at 3. "Okay." "Okay, Dad." Sage gathered her backpack and opened the truck door, then paused. "Dad, I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." William watched until Sage disappeared through the school's front doors, then sat in his truck for another minute just looking at the building. This was what mattered. This was what he was fighting for every day, every overtime hour, every ache in his back, and every bill that kept him awake at night. Sage deserved better than what he could give her right now, but he was going to keep working until he could provide it. The construction site was a 20-minute drive from the school, located on the outskirts of town, where a new subdivision was slowly taking shape. William had been working for Miller, construction for 8 months now, ever since his previous job at the lumber yard had ended when the company downsized. The pay was decent when there was work to be had, but construction in a mountain town was seasonal and unpredictable. Frank Miller was already on site when William arrived, a clipboard in his hand and a frown on his weather-beaten face. Frank was the kind of boss who demanded hard work but was fair with his employees, and he had been patient with William during the learning curve of transitioning from military service to civilian construction work. "Sure," Frank called out. William grabbed his tool belt from the truck. "I need you on the Henderson house today. They want the kitchen framing finished before the inspector comes through tomorrow." William nodded and headed toward the partially completed house that would eventually be home to some family lucky enough to afford new construction. The work was physical and demanding, requiring focus and precision, which suited William perfectly. When his hands were busy and his mind was occupied with measurements and angles, there was less room for the memories that sometimes tried to surface. The morning passed quickly as William lost himself in the rhythm of construction work. The repetitive motions of measuring, cutting, and securing boards provided a kind of meditation that helped quiet the restless energy that still lived in his chest, even 4 years after leaving the military. It was just after 11 when William stepped outside to grab more materials from his truck. The street in front of the construction site was quiet except for the occasional car passing by, and William was thinking about whether he could afford to buy Sage new school clothes that weekend when he saw the van. It was parked across the street, a dark blue vehicle with tinted windows that seemed out of place in the residential area. What caught William's attention wasn't the van itself, but the way the 3 men standing beside it were behaving. Their body language was tense, alert, and they kept looking around in a way that William recognized from his military training, surveillance behavior. Then he saw the young woman. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Crystal Wade was fighting. Even from across the street, William could see that the blonde woman wasn't going willingly toward the van. She was maybe 24, dressed in jeans and a college sweatshirt. And she was putting up more resistance than the three men had apparently expected. One of them had her by the arm, trying to drag her forward, while another kept looking around nervously to see if anyone was watching. William's first instinct was to look away. In the years since leaving the military, he had trained himself to avoid confrontation, to keep his head down and focus on his own problems. He had Sage to think about, bills to pay, and a life to rebuild. Getting involved in other people's troubles was a luxury he couldn't afford. But as he watched, the man holding Crystal's arm twisted it behind her back in a way that made her cry out in pain. The sound cut through the morning air and hit William like a physical blow. Suddenly, he wasn't standing outside a construction site in Vista Point, Idaho. He was back in places where predators hurt the innocent and good people looked the other way because it was safer. "Help me!" Crystal's voice carried across the street, desperate and terrified. "Somebody help me!" The three men were clearly agitated now. The one who seemed to be in charge, a thick-set man with dark hair, was speaking rapidly in what sounded like Russian. The second man, younger and nervous, kept scanning the street while the third continued trying to force Crystal toward the open van door. William found himself moving before he had consciously made the decision. His tool belt hit the ground as he crossed the street, his stride purposeful and direct. The years of civilian life seemed to fall away with each step, replaced by training that had been drilled into him until it became instinct. "Hey!" William called out when he was still 20 feet away. "Let her go!" The three men turned toward him, and William immediately read the situation in their faces and posture. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic attackers. They moved with the coordination of people who work together regularly, and the way they positioned themselves told William they had done this before. The man in charge stepped forward, his hand moving toward something under his jacket. "Walk away, friend. This is not your business." His English was heavily accented, confirming William's suspicion that he had heard Russian earlier. The man was probably in his 40s, with the kind of build that suggested he stayed in shape for professional reasons rather than personal health. "The lady asked for help," William said, continuing to move closer. "That makes it my business." Crystal was still struggling, but her eyes had found William's face, and he could see hope flickering there along with the fear. "Please," she said. "They're trying to take me somewhere. I don't know them." The younger man, who couldn't have been more than 25, was clearly getting nervous about the public nature of this confrontation. "Dmitri," he said to the leader, "we need to go now." Dmitri kept his eyes on William, sizing him up. William recognized the look. It was the way predators evaluated potential threats. What Dmitri saw was a construction worker in his late 30s, probably tired from a morning of manual labor, maybe soft from years of civilian life. What Dmitri couldn't see was the way William had automatically positioned himself to have multiple escape routes, the way his weight was balanced for quick movement, or the fact that his seemingly relaxed hands were actually positioned for maximum effectiveness if violence became necessary. "Last chance," Dmitri said. "Walk away." "Let her go," William repeated. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made Crystal stop struggling and stare at him. Even through her fear, she could sense that something had changed in the dynamic of the confrontation. The third man, who had been holding Crystal, suddenly shoved her hard toward the van while Dmitri reached under his jacket. William moved instantly, covering the distance between them in 3 quick steps. His left hand caught Dmitri's wrist before the gun could clear its holster, while his right drove into the man's solar plexus with enough force to double him over. The younger man reached for his own weapon, but William was already turning, using Dmitri's body as leverage to deliver a kick that caught the second attacker in the knee and sent him sprawling onto the pavement. The gun skittered away across the asphalt. Crystal had broken free and was running, but the third man caught her again before she could get clear. William could see her terror and determination warring in her face as she fought against her captor's grip. "Run!" William shouted to her. "Get to the construction site and call the police!" But even as he spoke, William realized that more men were emerging from the van. This wasn't just a 3-person operation. There were at least 5 of them, and they were better organized than he had initially thought. Dmitri was straightening up, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You have no idea what you have done," he gasped. "Who you are dealing with." "Enlighten me," William said, keeping his position between the attackers and Crystal. 2 more men had flanked around the van, and William quickly assessed the new odds. 5 against 1. Probably all armed, and at least one of them professionally trained. In his SEAL days, these would have been manageable numbers, but that was when he had backup, superior equipment, and the element of surprise. Now, he had a 12-year-old daughter who needed her father to come home every night. "Crystal," William called, without taking his eyes off the men in front of him. "Can you get to that house?" He nodded toward the construction site where Frank Miller was probably wondering why his employee had suddenly disappeared. "I think so," Crystal called back. She was pressed against a parked car, trying to use it as cover. "On my signal, you run! Don't look back, don't stop! Get inside and call 911. Dmitri had recovered enough to straighten up completely, and his hand was moving toward his jacket again. "You think you are a hero?" he asked William. "You think you saved the day, like in the movies?" "I think I'm a guy who doesn't like seeing women get hurt," William replied. "Apparently that makes me different from you." The standoff stretched for several seconds, both sides calculating odds and possibilities. William could feel the familiar tension in his muscles, the way his breathing had automatically shifted to the controlled rhythm he had learned in training. Part of him was surprised at how easily the old reflexes had returned. Dmitri suddenly smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "You want to play hero? Fine. But understand, this does not end here. We know this town. We know who lives here. We will find you." "Good luck with that," William said. Dmitri said something in Russian to his men, and they began moving toward the van, but William noticed that one of them was circling around, trying to get an angle on Crystal. "Now!" William shouted. Crystal ran, sprinting toward the construction site with a speed born of desperation. The man trying to intercept her broke into a run as well, but William was already moving. He tackled the runner from behind, sending both of them crashing into the side of a parked pickup truck. The impact drove the air from William's lungs, but he managed to keep the other man from pursuing Crystal. Behind him, he could hear Dmitri shouting orders and the sound of van doors slamming. When William looked up, the van was pulling away from the curb with a screech of tires. Dmitri was in the passenger seat, and he made eye contact with William through the window. Even from a distance, William could read the promise in the stare. This wasn't over. William picked himself up from the pavement, checking automatically for injuries. His shoulder was going to be sore tomorrow, and he had scraped his hands on the truck's bumper, but nothing was serious. More importantly, Crystal was safe. He found her at the construction site, standing next to Frank Miller and speaking rapidly into a cell phone. When she saw William approaching, she ended the call and ran toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking him up and down for signs of injury. "I called 911. The police are on their way." "I'm fine," William said. "What about you? Did they hurt you?" Crystal shook her head, but William could see that she was shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind the full reality of what had almost happened to her. Frank Miller approached them, his expression grim. "Sure. What the hell was that about? Who were those guys?" "I don't know," William said, which was mostly true. He had suspicions, but no concrete information. "I just saw them trying to force her into a van." "Human traffickers," Crystal said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "That's what they were. I've been investigating disappearances of young women in this area. I think I got too close to something they didn't want me to find." Frank's expression darkened. "Human trafficking here in Vista Point?" "It's everywhere," Crystal said. "Small towns, big cities. They target vulnerable women, especially ones without strong support systems or ones who won't be missed right away." William studied Crystal's face, noting the way she spoke about the subject with knowledge that went beyond casual research. "You said you were investigating? Are you a cop?" "Criminal justice major at the community college," Crystal explained. "But I've been doing research for a paper on human trafficking patterns in rural areas. When my roommate, Jessica, disappeared 3 months ago, I started looking deeper into similar cases." The sound of sirens was getting closer, and William could see a police cruiser turning onto their street. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the thought of giving statements and answering questions about his background. "Crystal," he said, "when the police get here, just tell them what happened. Don't mention anything about my military service unless they specifically ask." She looked at him curiously. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to build a quiet life for my daughter," William said. "And getting involved in situations like this isn't part of that plan." But even as he spoke the words, William knew it was too late for that kind of thinking. Dimitri's parting threat had been clear. They would find him. And if they could find him, they could find Sage. The police cruiser pulled up to the construction site, followed by a second car. 2 officers got out, and William recognized one of them, Officer Martinez, who had helped him navigate the paperwork when he had enrolled Sage in school 3 years ago. "Mr. Shaw," Martinez called out as he approached. "We got a call about an attempted abduction." "That's right," William said. "These men were trying to force this young woman into a van. She managed to get away." As Crystal began telling her story to the officers, William found himself scanning the street automatically, looking for signs of surveillance or return visits. The van was long gone, but that didn't mean the threat had ended. Frank Miller was standing beside him, still looking shaken by the morning's events. "Sure," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to fight like that? That wasn't construction worker stuff." William met his boss's eyes, seeing genuine concern there, along with curiosity. "I served in the Navy for 8 years," he said. Some habits die hard. This was technically true, though it left out the more significant details about which part of the Navy and what kind of training he had received. Frank nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation, but William knew that the simple days of construction work and quiet evenings with Sage were probably over. Dimitri's threat hadn't been idle, and men like that didn't make empty promises. Somehow, without meaning to, William had stepped back into a world he had spent 4 years trying to leave behind. Detective Valentina Santos arrived at the construction site 40 minutes after the initial call, driving an unmarked sedan that had seen better years. William watched her emerge from the car with the purposeful stride of someone who had been dealing with serious crimes long enough to recognize their patterns. She was probably in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm Detective Santos," she said, approaching the group. "I understand we had an attempted abduction this morning." Officer Martinez nodded toward Crystal, who was sitting on the tailgate of William's truck with a blanket around her shoulders. "Miss Wade here says she was grabbed by 3 men trying to force her into a van. Mr. Shaw intervened and they fled the scene." Santos looked at William with interest. "Mr. Shaw, is it? Can you walk me through what you saw?" For the next 20 minutes, William recounted the morning's events, while Santos took detailed notes. She asked good questions, the kind that told William she had experience with human trafficking cases. When he described Dimitri's accent and the Russian he had heard, her expression became more serious. "Miss Wade," Santos said, turning to Crystal, "you mentioned you've been researching missing persons cases in the area. Can you tell me more about that?" Crystal straightened up, and William could see her shifting from victim to someone with important information to share. "I'm a criminal justice major, and I was working on a research project about trafficking patterns in rural communities, but it became personal when my roommate, Jessica Williams, disappeared 3 months ago. Jessica was 23, had been in foster care, no family to speak of. She fit the profile of someone who might just disappear. But I knew Jessica. She wouldn't have left without telling me. She was working 2 jobs and saving money for nursing school." Crystal's voice had an edge to it. "But I knew Jessica. She wouldn't have left without telling me. She was working 2 jobs and saving money for nursing school." Santos nodded thoughtfully. "What made you think her disappearance was connected to trafficking?" "The pattern," Crystal said. "Over the past 18 months, 7 young women between 18 and 25 have disappeared from communities within a 100-mile radius of Vista Point. All of them were from vulnerable backgrounds, foster care, broken families, financial problems. None of them had strong support networks. These women didn't just run away." Santos closed her notebook and looked at Crystal with something approaching respect. "Miss Wade, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation, but not here." She turned to William. "Mr. Shaw, I'll need you to come to the station as well to give a formal statement." "When?" William asked, thinking about picking up Sage from school. "This afternoon would be good. Say 2 hours." William checked his watch. It was almost noon now, which would give him time to finish the morning's work and still make it to the station before Sage got out of school. "I can do that." As the police cars pulled away, Frank Miller approached William with a concerned expression. "Sure. You sure you're okay? That was some serious stuff that went down here." "I'm fine, Frank. Thanks for letting me handle the police interviews on company time. Frank waved dismissively. Don't worry about that. I'm more concerned about these trafficking guys. You think they'll come back? William considered the question. In his experience, criminals like Dmitri didn't make idle threats. They had lost face this morning, and they would want to correct that situation. The question was when and how. I think we should be careful for a while, William said. Maybe have someone else work this site for a few days. You worried about them coming, after you specifically. I'm worried about collateral damage, William said, which was true enough. If they do come back, I don't want any of your other workers getting caught in the middle. Frank nodded, understanding the logic. Take the rest of the day off, get your statement done, and make sure your daughter's okay. We'll figure out the work schedule tomorrow. William gathered his tools and headed home. But first, he made a detour past Sage's school. He didn't get out of the truck, just drove slowly past the building, scanning for anything that looked out of place. 2 men in a car that didn't belong. A van parked where it shouldn't be. Anyone paying too much attention to the children. He saw nothing suspicious, but that didn't make him feel better. Professional traffickers wouldn't be obvious about surveillance, and Dmitri had struck him as someone who knew what he was doing. Back at the apartment, William found himself pacing restlessly. The small space that had felt like a refuge this morning now felt like a trap. He checked the locks on both the front door and the sliding door that led to their tiny balcony. He looked out the windows, memorizing which cars were parked on the street and making note of any that seemed out of place. His phone rang, making him jump slightly. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello, Mr. Shaw. This is Lisa Parker from Child Protective Services. I wonder if we could schedule a time to talk. William's blood went cold. About what? We received a call this morning suggesting that you might be involved in some dangerous activities that could put your daughter at risk. I'd like to discuss the situation with you. William closed his eyes, understanding immediately what had happened. Dmitri had made good on his threat faster than expected, and he had chosen the most effective weapon possible against a single father. Miss Parker, William said carefully, I was involved in stopping an attempted kidnapping this morning. I gave a statement to the police. If someone called to suggest I was doing something that endangered my daughter, they were lying. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly, Parker said, but her tone suggested she was following protocol rather than expressing personal belief. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? I can meet with you, William said, but I want Detective Santos from the Vista Point Police Department to be present. She can verify exactly what happened this morning. There was a pause. That's unusual, Mr. Shaw. So is getting a false report called in by criminals who are angry that I interfered with their human trafficking operation. Another pause. I'll contact Detective Santos and see if we can arrange something. In the meantime, I want to be clear that this is just a preliminary inquiry. No decisions have been made about anything. After hanging up, William sat on his couch and tried to control the anger that was building in his chest. Dmitri was smart. Attacking William directly would have been risky and might not have been effective, but threatening his relationship with Sage hit him where he was most vulnerable. His phone rang again. This time it was Crystal Wade. Mr. Shaw, I got your number from the police report. I wanted to thank you for this morning and also to warn you about something." "What kind of warning?" "After I gave my statement, I went back to my apartment to get some of my research materials to show Detective Santos. Someone had been there. They didn't take anything obvious, but things were moved around. They were looking for something." William wasn't surprised. "Are you somewhere safe now?" "I'm at the police station. Detective Santos suggested I stay here until she can arrange protective custody or something. But Mr. Shaw, there's something else. I think they're going to try to discredit you. They already started." William told her about the CPS call. "That's exactly what I was afraid of," Crystal said. "When I was researching Jessica's disappearance, I talked to someone in Spokane whose sister had been taken by traffickers. When he tried to get the police to investigate, suddenly he was being investigated for tax evasion and child endangerment. These people have resources and connections." William absorbed this information, adding it to his growing understanding of what he was up against. This wasn't just a local criminal operation. It was something bigger and more sophisticated. "Crystal," he said, "what exactly did you find in your research? What made you such a threat to them that they came after you personally?" "I identified their recruitment pattern," she said. "They're not just grabbing random women off the street. They have a systematic approach. Fake job offers, fake modeling agencies, fake educational opportunities. They target women who are isolated or desperate, and they do their homework first." "What kind of homework?" "Background checks, financial records, family situations. They know which women won't be missed right away, and they know which ones can be manipulated through fear or economic pressure." Jessica got approached about a modeling opportunity 3 days before she disappeared. William felt a chill run down his spine. "Crystal, have you shared this research with anyone else?" "Just you and Detective Santos." "Why?" "Because if they were willing to grab you to stop your investigation, they might go after anyone else who has access to that information." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Crystal said, "Mr. Shaw, I need to ask you something. When you fought those men this morning, that wasn't just construction worker adrenaline. You moved like someone with military training. Serious military training." William considered how much to tell her. "I served in the Navy for 8 years. "What did you do in the Navy?" "Classified," William said, which was technically true. "Mr. Sure, these people are dangerous. They have money. They have connections. And they're willing to hurt innocent people to protect their operation. If you're thinking about trying to fight them on your own, you need to know what you're up against." "I'm not looking for a fight," William said. "I just want to protect my daughter and get back to my normal life." "I don't think that's going to be possible," Crystal said quietly. "Not after this morning. They see you as a threat now, and they're not going to just forget about you." After Crystal hung up, William sat in his apartment thinking about the situation he found himself in. 3 hours ago, his biggest worry had been making the rent payment. Now, he was dealing with human traffickers who had connections to social services and the resources to destroy his life systematically. He looked at the clock. 2:15 p.m. He needed to leave for the police station, and then he needed to pick up Sage from school. Tonight, he would have to figure out how to explain to a 12-year-old that their quiet life in Vista Point had just become a lot more complicated. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Crystal had discovered in her research, and he needed to know how much danger they were all in. Because one thing was becoming clear. This wasn't going to end with a police report and a warning to be careful. Dmitri had made this personal, and men like Dmitri didn't give up easily. William checked his watch again, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. Detective Santos was waiting for him, and he had a feeling that what she had to tell him was going to change everything. The Vista Point Police Department occupied a modest brick building on Main Street that looked more like a small-town library than a law enforcement facility. William parked his truck and walked through the front doors at exactly 2, his mind still processing the phone call from Child Protective Services and Crystal's warning about her ransacked apartment. Detective Santos met him in the lobby, holding a thick manila folder and wearing an expression that suggested she had been having a busy afternoon. "Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming in. We've got a lot to discuss." She led him to a small interview room with fluorescent lighting and a table that had seen better decades. William noticed that she left the door open, a sign that this was a cooperative conversation rather than an interrogation. "Before we start," Santos said, settling into her chair, "I want you to know that I've been working trafficking cases for 3 years. What happened this morning and what Miss Wade has shared with me suggests we're dealing with something much bigger than a local operation." William nodded. "Crystal mentioned they might have connections to official agencies. Someone called CPS on me today." Santos's expression darkened. "What did they allege?" "That I was involved in dangerous activities that put my daughter at risk. The timing wasn't a coincidence." "No, it wasn't," Santos agreed. "These organizations are sophisticated. They don't just traffic people. They traffic information, influence, and fear. When someone threatens their operation, they respond systematically." She opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. William recognized Dmitri from the morning's confrontation, but there were also photos of other men he didn't recognize. "This is Dmitri Vulov," Santos said, pointing to Dmitri's photo. "We've been trying to build a case against him for 8 months. He's the local lieutenant for a trafficking network that operates throughout the Pacific Northwest. What you interrupted